The beacon had been sitting there for 11,000 years. Nobody built it as decoration. Nobody left it as a curiosity. Whatever had placed it at the edge of that small, unremarkable star system had done so with the kind of care that only comes from knowing exactly what it was warning about. The device was simple. A sphere no larger than a ground vehicle, pocked and darkened by millennia of cosmic dust. But the signal it produced was anything but simple. It broadcast on every frequency known to the Vorthon Dominion's translation arrays. It broadcast on frequencies the Dominion hadn't catalogued yet. It repeated the same words in 1,100 distinct language structures, acoustic formats, and mathematical symbol sets. Sol system. Do not engage. You have been warned. That was all. No explanation of who built it, no elaboration on what waited inside the quarantine zone, no threat, no offer of negotiation, just the words, and the patience of something that had been saying them across deep time to anyone who passed close enough to listen. High Warlord Vex Karath listened for approximately 4 seconds. Then he laughed. It was not a gentle laugh. It was the kind that fills a command deck and rolls off the walls, the kind that other officers join because they understand that joining is safer than not joining. The 12 senior members of his strategic council laughed with him. The signals officer who had relayed the beacon translation laughed too, though she did it quietly, and kept her eyes on her console, and was the only one in the room who would later be willing to testify at the tribunal that she had felt something cold move through her when she first read the words. She never said that during the laughter. She watched her instruments. Vex Karath's laughter wound down the way a machine winds down, gradually, with full awareness of where it was going. He had the long, segmented body of the Vorthon ruling caste, 8 limbs folded into the formal rest position of command, skin cycling through the gray-amber tones that meant he was entertained. He was almost always entertained. In 400 years of campaigns, he had found the galaxy to be an endlessly amusing place, full of species that built things and believed in those things, and then watched those things fail against his fleet's forward guns. He had erased 17 of those species. He was not a monster, by his own accounting. Monsters acted from feeling. He acted from logic. The galaxy had finite resources and infinite entropy. Only one species could manage the former against the latter. The Vorthon had proven, over 40 millennia of calculated expansion, that they were that species. Everything else was paperwork. He looked at the beacon translation on his display for a moment longer. You have been warned. Destroy it, he said. The weapons officer didn't hesitate. A single focused pulse from the nearest cruiser turned the 11,000-year-old device into a brief, bright smear of light against the black. The signal cut off mid-broadcast. Vex Karath watched the smear fade. Then he turned back to his star charts and said, "Continue advance." The Sol system spread out across his tactical display, like a diagram from a child's educational program. 1 star, medium class. 8 planets, 2 of them gas giants of modest size. 1 rocky world with a single large moon, sitting at comfortable distance from the star, wrapped in a thin blue haze that his atmospheric sensors confirmed was mostly nitrogen and oxygen. Warm, wet, the kind of world that appeared in recruitment materials for colonization fleets. The energy signatures were low, scattered. There were structures on the blue world, on its moon, on the 4th planet, a dry, rust-colored rock, and a loose belt of habitation platforms drifting between the 4th planet and the 1st gas giant. By Dominion standards of measurement, the total military-grade energy output of the entire system barely registered as background noise. His assessment officer placed the threat evaluation on screen. Level 2. Pre-interstellar civilization. Colonial reach limited to home system. No recorded contact with galactic community. No known alliances. Recommended protocol. Standard harvest. Psychological saturation first, followed by fleet presence, followed by ultimatum, followed by processing. Estimated resistance duration, 8 to 14 standard cycles. Vex Karath had run this protocol on 43 civilizations. It worked every time. He authorized the advance and went to eat. The HSV Bridger. Picked them up on long-range sensors when the Vorthon fleet crossed what the crew had been trained since childhood to call the outer marker. A boundary that existed in no physical form, only in human protocol, only in the understanding that anything crossing it without clearance was a problem that needed a voice attached to it before it needed anything else. Lieutenant Commander Yael Torres was 38 years old, born in a city that had flooded twice in her lifetime, the daughter of an engineer who had rebuilt the same seawall 3 times and called it optimism. She commanded a patrol vessel that was, by galactic standards, roughly equivalent to a fishing boat trying to hail an ocean liner. The Bridger had good sensors, adequate weapons, and a crew of 41 people who were professional enough not to show each other how frightened they were. Torres showed nobody anything. She looked at the sensor return. 400 contacts, minimum, dense formation, energy signatures that made the Bridger. Says tactical computer reach for comparisons and come back empty, and she picked up the hail channel. Her communications officer had the translation matrix running before she asked. The United Earth Defense Compact had been building xenolinguistic libraries for 60 years, on the standing assumption that one day this kind of moment would arrive. The moment had arrived. Torres cleared her throat. Unidentified fleet. This is Lieutenant Commander Yael Torres of the HSV Bridger. United Earth Defense Compact. You have entered a restricted zone. Please identify your origin and your intent, and hold your current position. She kept her voice the way her mother kept a seawall. Present. Level. Aware of the water. The response took 11 minutes, which was the translation lag. When it came in clear, flat tones, machine-generated, technically accurate, carrying in its very precision a quality that Torres would later describe in the official report as amused. The fleet identified itself as the forward arm of the Vorthon Dominion. It offered no explanation of intent. It asked no questions. What it said, in the flat voice of a translation matrix that had no interest in softening anything, was this. Your vessel is noted. Your zone designation is not recognized under Dominion jurisdiction. Stand clear of our advance, or be removed from it. Torres sat with that for a moment. 41 people on the one. Bridger. Listened to the silence of their commander sitting with it. She keyed the channel again. I'm going to ask you to hold your position one more time. I want to be clear that this request is being made in good faith, and that whatever comes next will not be a result of misunderstanding on our part. She waited. The fleet did not hold. It continued its advance at the same speed, in the same formation, without adjustment. Torres looked at her navigator. Her navigator looked at her. Record my voice for the data buoy, Torres said. Her voice had not changed. It was still the seawall. This is Lieutenant Commander Torres, HSV Bridger. We have confirmed contact with an unidentified hostile fleet, minimum 400 vessels, crossing the outer marker on a direct heading for the inner system. All attempts at communication have been unsuccessful. Recommend immediate fleet mobilization. She paused. Tell them we did everything right. The navigator recorded it. The data buoy launched. It went faster than anything the Vorthon fleet would bother tracking. A small bright needle of light punching toward the inner system, with everything the Bridger knew. Then Torres turned back to her console and began targeting solutions that she understood she would not have time to use. She was right. The Vorthon ship that destroyed the Bridger didn't slow down, it didn't signal, it fired from a distance that the Bridger sensors had only just resolved as a distinct contact, a single weapon discharge that was, by Dominion tactical doctrine, the appropriate response to an obstacle of insufficient mass to require more. The Bridger came apart in a way that produced a brief bloom of heat and light, and then nothing. 41 people. The Vorthon fleet logged the engagement as an obstacle cleared and continued its advance. The data buoy reached Admiral Sarah Voss's command station at 0340 hours, station time. She was not asleep. She had not been sleeping much lately. There was a specific quality to the waiting that had settled over the inner system in the past several months, a tightness, a held breath, that made sleep feel like a poor use of time. She had been at her desk with cold coffee and a tactical simulation she'd been running for the 19th time, looking for something in it that she hadn't found in the first 18. The buoy data came through her communications officer, who forwarded it without commentary, because there was no commentary that would help. Voss read Torres's report. She read it twice. She listened to the voice recording once. Tell them we did everything right. She sat with that. Then she put down her coffee, which was cold, and she opened a channel to the full UEDDC fleet. Every ship, every station, every garrison, every soldier in the solar system who was wearing a comm badge. and she said 4 words. They touched one of ours. She closed the channel. She picked up her coffee again, remembered it was cold, and set it back down. Outside the viewport, the stars looked the same as they always had, patient, indifferent, old in a way that made every war ever fought look like an argument between children. Voss had been born on Mars, in a colony that had nearly died 3 times and hadn't. She had grown up understanding that the difference between a place that survives and a place that doesn't is not resources or luck or geography. It is the decision, made once, to not stop. She pulled up the fleet deployment map. She began to work. In the Vorthon fleet, Vex Karath received no report about the destroyed patrol vessel. It was below the threshold of events that required his attention. He was reviewing the inner system's colonial infrastructure, estimating processing timelines, planning the psychological saturation broadcast that would precede his formal ultimatum. He expected fear. He expected silence. He expected the particular quality of stillness that comes from a civilization confronting something it cannot fight. He had seen it 43 times. He knew what it looked like. He did not know what it looked like when it was something else entirely. That was the only mistake he ever made. It was enough. The Vorthon fleet expected noise. They always got noise. Every species, when it saw 400 warships crossing into its home system, made noise, distress signals, emergency broadcasts, panicked evacuation orders bleeding across every frequency. The noise was useful. It told you where the population centers were, where the leadership was hiding, how fast the psychological collapse was moving. Vex Karath's intelligence officers were trained to read a civilization's death rattle the way a physician reads a pulse. They heard nothing. Not signal interference. Not the static of a civilization too primitive to broadcast. Nothing in the deliberate, chosen, weighted sense of the word. The inner system sat on every frequency, like a man who has heard the knock at the door and decided, very consciously, not to answer it. The intelligence officer who flagged this said, carefully, "High Warlord." The silence is structured. Vex Karath looked at her. "It's not absence," she said. "They've pulled their communications inward. Short range only. Tight beam. They're talking to each other. We just can't hear what they're saying." He thought about this for a moment. A species that goes quiet when threatened is either surrendering or hunting. He had seen both. He knew the difference. He looked at the tactical display. The small, warm planet, the rust-colored fourth world, the belt of habitation platforms, and he decided it was surrender. What else could it be? His assessment had given them a level 2 rating, pre-interstellar, no known alliances, a patrol vessel with 41 people that had faced his fleet and died in 4 seconds. He decided the silence was fear wearing a calm face. He had been wrong before. Once. He had learned from it, or thought he had. The lesson he took from his one mistake, 40 years ago against the Saravathi, was this: strike the center first, fast, before they organize. Don't let them breathe. Don't give the silence time to turn into something else. He gave the order to accelerate toward the inner system. The silence continued. They found Jupiter by accident. That's not entirely fair. The Vorthon fleet knew the gas giant was there, logged it as a navigational feature, calculated its gravitational influence on their approach vector, and moved on. What they did not do, because it did not occur to them to do it, was consider what might be on the other side of it. Not behind it. Other side. The shadow side. The face Jupiter turned away from the sun, away from any angle the Vorthon approach had given their sensors a clean look at. 11 days of nothing but the giant's own storm systems and magnetic tantrums masking everything beneath it. 11 days of 53 human ships sitting in the dark, powered down to minimum life support, no active sensors, no drives, nothing that radiated enough energy to be worth distinguishing from background noise. The crews breathed recycled air that tasted of metal and other people's exhaustion. They ate cold rations from sealed pouches. They ran silent drills in the dark, in whispers, because the commanding officers knew that doing nothing is its own kind of erosion, and they needed their people sharp, not quiet crazy. They had been there since before the Vorthon crossed the outer marker. Sarah Voss had put them there the same hour she read Torres's report. She had done it without committee, without formal authorization from the full UADT Council, on the understanding that authorization was a thing you sought when you had time, and she did not have time. The Council could debate her conduct after. She put 53 ships in Jupiter's shadow, told them to go dark and stay dark until they heard from her, and then went back to her desk and planned the rest of it. The commanding officer in Jupiter's shadow was Captain Henrique Mata, a large, quiet man from Sao Paulo, who had spent 20 years in the UADC, and whose defining professional characteristic was that he never told his crew more than they needed to know about how scared he was. On day 3 in the dark, one of his junior officers had asked him if he thought it was going to work. Mata had looked at the officer for a long moment. "Eat your ration," he said. On day 11, the signal came. Not a voice signal. A specific pulse sequence on a frequency the Vorthon wouldn't have in their signal library. A pattern that meant one word in the context of this specific operation. A word Mata had been waiting 11 days to receive. Now, he ate the last of his ration pouch. Cold bean paste and something that claimed to be protein. He set the empty pouch in the waste receptacle, with the particular care of a man who is about to go do something violent and wants the space around him to be clean. "Power up," he said. "All ships. Combat ready. You have 90 seconds. 90 seconds of noise and heat bloom and drive signatures all at once, pouring out from Jupiter's shadow into the flank of the Vorthon formation that had never once looked left." The engagement lasted 4 hours. It looked nothing like what the Vorthon called war. Vorthon combat doctrine was structured like a ceremony. Opening formations, formal weapons exchanges, calculated escalation, a point at which the losing party's continued resistance became irrational, and they submitted. It had a shape. It had a grammar. Vex Karath had fought inside this grammar for 4 centuries and found it elegant. War, done properly, was a conversation with a predictable ending. What Mata's fleet did was not a conversation. It was 53 ships moving in coordinated chaos, never holding a position long enough to be bracketed, sharing targeting data across a network that made each ship's sensor picture the whole fleet's sensor picture, hitting and folding back and hitting from another angle before the Vorthon fire control could recalculate. Ships that should have been out of ammunition somehow weren't. Vectors that the Vorthon tactical AI modeled as closed kept opening. Every time a Vorthon gunner found a solution, the solution moved. The Vorthon lost 44 ships. They killed 31 of Mata's. Mata did not celebrate. He logged the losses the way a man logs a debt, carefully, with full awareness that it was not a number, it was people, and that the difference between a number and people is the only thing worth being careful about. He sent the casualty report to Voss, with a 3-word addendum. Phase 1 complete. Dr. Oman Farid had been listening to the Vorthon talk since before the Bridger was destroyed. He had been doing it from a converted signals room in a UEDC research station on Ganymede, surrounded by equipment that looked like it had been assembled by someone with strong opinions and a limited budget, which it had. He was 44 years old, originally from Karachi, and had spent the last 19 years of his career as a xenolinguist in a field that had, until very recently, been considered mostly theoretical. He had a talent for pattern recognition that his colleagues described as alarming, and that he described as simply paying attention, in a universe that was always talking, if you knew how to listen. He had been listening to the Vorthon for 11 days. He had their phoneme structure. He had their sentence grammar, which was built around hierarchy in a way so fundamental it was woven into their verb tenses, who was speaking, and to whom altered the verb form entirely, which meant you could hear rank in every sentence before you understood a word of it. He had their technical vocabulary for weapons and navigation, and threat assessment. And he had found something else. A frequency, not a channel, a pattern within communications, a specific tonal shift that appeared in Vorthon signals at particular moments. He had first noticed it in the recording of Vex Karath's command deck when the Bridger hailed them. It had appeared briefly, suppressed quickly, in the senior council's communication after the patrol vessel was destroyed. After the Jupiter ambush, it was in everything. Every signal, every command exchange, every status report from every ship in the fleet. The same tonal pattern, layered into the subtext of their communications like a hum under a conversation. Farid ran it through his analysis framework 3 times before he said anything to anyone. Then he wrote 1 line in his working notes, which would eventually be reproduced in 17 academic papers and 2 histories of the war. They have a frequency for surprise. It hasn't turned off. Corporal Danny Reyes had not been in Jupiter's shadow. She had been on Europa, in a garrison that spent most of its time doing equipment checks and watching ice. The garrison had 40 soldiers, and enough weaponry to hold a position against a moderate ground assault, which was useful if you were defending against something that had ground troops and intended to use them, and less useful if you were defending against an alien fleet that could crack your dome from orbit and never set foot on the surface. She knew this. She did the equipment checks anyway. She watched the ice. She talked to the other 39 soldiers in the garrison with the specific quality of conversation that exists between people who are sharing information they haven't officially received. Scraps of fleet movements, fragments of signals traffic, the particular way that senior officers walked when they knew something the ranks didn't. The way they were walking now. On day 12, the garrison commander told them to prepare for possible redeployment. He didn't say where. He didn't say when. He said, possible, which in Reyes's experience meant certain. And the uncertainty was only about the timing. She went back to her bunk after the briefing and sat on the edge of it for a moment. She opened a channel to her mother in Manila. The signal lag from Europa was 11 minutes each way, which meant a conversation was really 2 monologues separated by patience. She was used to it. She had grown up with a father on the asteroid belt, and she had learned, young, that love across distance is mostly the willingness to talk into silence and trust that it gets there. Her mother answered on the second try, face filling the small screen with the slightly overlit quality of a kitchen at midday. Behind her, something was cooking. Reyes could not smell it. She was on Europa. But she knew what her mother's kitchen smelled like when the window was open and the fan was running, and whatever was in the pot had been there since morning. She talked about that. She talked about what her mother was cooking, what spices, whether the vendor at the corner market was still overcharging for the good vinegar. She asked about her cousin's wedding, which had been delayed twice already. She talked about the ice on Europa, how it moved in ways that looked almost geological, almost alive, how you could stand at the viewport for an hour just watching the slow violence of tectonic stress working itself out across a frozen surface. She did not talk about the Vorthon fleet. She did not talk about Jupiter, or the Bridger, or Voss's 4 words that had gone out across every channel and sat in Reyes's chest like a stone she hadn't put down since. She just talked. 22 minutes later, her mother's reply came through. The cooking, the vendor, yes, the vinegar. It's robbery. The wedding is set for next month. Finally, you should come. And Reyes sat with her mother's voice filling the bunk room and watched the ice through the small porthole above her bed. The same ice, the slow violence, the frozen surface moving in ways you could only see if you were patient enough to watch. She thought about Torres. Tell them we did everything right. She thought about that for a long time. The ultimatum arrived the next morning. It came across every frequency simultaneously, a formal Vorthon transmission, translated by Vex Karath's own language systems into something approximating human speech. His translators had been working from the Bridger's hail recording, which was, Farid noted in his log, both efficient and interesting. They were good. They had the grammar. They had the vocabulary. They did not have the idiom. What Vex Karath sent was technically correct and emotionally inert. A demand for surrender, evacuation of leadership, submission to processing, delivered in the flat tones of a machine that understood the words but not the weight of them. It gave humanity 6 standard cycles to respond. Voss read it at her desk. She calculated the conversion of Vorthon standard cycles to human hours and wrote the number on a piece of paper, which she did not look at again. Then she picked up a pen and wrote Earth's response. It was not a surrender. She sent it in 2 hours. Attached to the response, in a data package that Vex Karath's intelligence officers would spend the next 4 hours debating, were schematics, weapons systems, tactical assessments, defensive architecture, all of it accurate, all of it real, all of it true. The debate on the Vorthon command deck was long and contentious. A species that showed you its weapons before battle did so for one reason only, in Vorthon doctrine. One reason, clean and categorical. It was asking to lose gracefully. Vex Karath looked at the schematics for a long time. He looked at the weapons data, and the defensive positions, and the layered structure of what humanity had apparently been building, quietly, without anyone noticing. He decided it was a bluff. In his 400 years he had seen this move before. Species that knew they were outmatched sometimes tried to manufacture the appearance of strength, hoping the cost-benefit calculation would make the aggressor reconsider. It never worked. He set the schematics aside. He gave the order to advance on the inner system. On Ganymede, Farid was still watching the frequency. It was still running. Constant now. Background noise in every Vorthon communication. A hum under everything. The sound a species makes when the world has stopped fitting the shape they had for it, and they haven't found a new shape yet. He had a word for it now. He had found it in their language. Buried in an old military text his translation matrix had pulled from the signals archive. A Vorthon concept, ancient, rarely used, referring to a specific psychological state in combat. He wrote the translation in his notes. Fighting a fire that learns. He underlined it. Then he went back to listening. The Vorthon Strategic Council spent 4 hours on the schematics. 4 hours. Vex Karath let them go because he was curious what they would conclude, and because he already knew what he thought, and because the best way to confirm your own reading of a thing is to watch other intelligent minds arrive at the same place by different roads. They concluded, bluff. He agreed. He folded the schematics into a secondary file and left them there, the way you leave a rock you've already turned over, done with, categorized, no longer interesting. He had seen this before. Species that couldn't fight sometimes tried to manufacture the silhouette of something that could. Show your teeth. Hope the predator hesitates. Hope hesitation becomes recalculation. Hope recalculation becomes withdrawal. It never worked. He authorized the push toward the inner system and went back to his campaign timeline. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, not even the signals officer who had felt something cold move through her at the beacon, was that the schematics were real. Every weapon, every position, every layered defensive structure labeled and diagrammed with the careful hand of engineers who had been building things in the dark for 30 years and were now, for the first time, turning on the lights. All of it real, none of it complete. 31 years before the Bridger died, a woman named Dr. Lena Park stood in a cold room on the lunar surface and played the precursor beacon's signal through a speaker at 1/4 speed. She listened to it for 6 hours. Then she wrote one line in her field notebook. This was not placed here to warn them away from us. It was placed here to warn them away for us. The difference between those two things, away from, away for, was the size of an ocean, and she knew it, and she spent the next 4 years making sure the right people knew it too. Not the politicians, not the generals, not yet, the engineers, the materials scientists, the propulsion theorists who worked in university basements and published papers that 11 people read and 3 understood. She brought them the beacon. She said, something left this here because it knew what we would become, or what we could become, or what we would need to be. And whatever that something was, it is gone now, which means the warning only works if we make it work. She said, we have time. Not much, but some. She said, let's not waste it. The project had no official name for the first 8 years. The people who worked on it called it, among themselves, the Quiet, because that was its primary discipline, building without broadcasting, developing without announcing, growing teeth in a mouth that stayed closed. Funding came through 11 different civilian research channels. None of the paperwork used military language. If you read any single file, you would find a material science grant, or a propulsion study, or an atmospheric modeling contract. You had to read all of them at once to see the shape underneath. Most people never read all of them at once. That was the point. Admiral Voss walked the war room through the real plan at 0600 hours, the morning after the response transmission went out. The room had 11 people in it. 11. The UADC had committees with more members than that for deciding cafeteria menus. Voss had 11 people in a room, and she walked them through what 31 years of the Quiet had actually produced, and the room was silent in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The schematics they'd sent to Vex Karath were accurate. They were also the first 2 pages of a document that was 400 pages long. They'll see the outer defense layer, Voss said, pointing at the display with a pen she'd been chewing on since before anyone else arrived. They'll push through it. We let them. It's designed to give. It's designed to feel like progress. She turned the page. The second layer doesn't announce itself. It comes online as they advance. From vectors they won't have mapped, because they don't exist until we switch them on. 30 years of orbital infrastructure that broadcasts as civilian equipment. Cargo handling platforms, ice mining rigs, Atmospheric research buoys. She paused. None of it is cargo handling platforms. One of the officers, young, from a Martian family, the kind of person who asked good questions because he hadn't learned yet which questions you weren't supposed to ask, said, "Why did we send them the real schematics at all?" Voss looked at him. "Because we warned them," she said. "The beacon warned them. Torres warned them. The schematics warned them. If they chose not to believe any of it." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The young officer nodded slowly and wrote something in his notes that Voss didn't read and wouldn't have corrected if she had. She turned back to the display and turned another page. Corporal Danny Reyes got her redeployment orders on a Tuesday. Or what passed for Tuesday on Europa, where the calendar was the only thing that made days real, and even that felt like an argument you had to keep winning. The orders came through on a standard UADC deployment packet, destination classified until arrival, transport departing in 6 hours. She was told to pack light. She owned nothing heavy. The transport was a converted ore carrier. Fast, ugly, smelling of the belt in a way that meant it had been out past Jupiter more times than its maintenance logs admitted. 40 soldiers from 3 different garrisons, none of them told the same amount of nothing. She sat next to a man from Lagos named Corporal Eze, who did card tricks when he was nervous, not for an audience, just for his own hands, watching his fingers do the thing they knew how to do, while the rest of him waited to find out what it had to do. She watched him do it for 20 minutes without saying anything. Then she said, "You any good?" He looked at her. "Good enough." She held out her hand. He put a card face down on her palm. She turned it over. "King of Spades." "Huh," she said. "Yeah," he said. The transport moved. Europa fell away behind them, small and white, exactly as cold as it looked. The fortress had no official designation in any file Reyes had ever accessed. The soldiers who ran it called it the Shelf, for reasons nobody who was currently alive could explain, and it sat inside an asteroid that had been quietly hollowed and reinforced and filled over 23 years with the kind of infrastructure that only makes sense if you believe, genuinely believe, that the day will come when something very large and very hostile will need to be made to regret its choices. She walked through the main corridor with her deployment packet and stopped counting things she didn't understand after the first 40 seconds, because the count was getting embarrassing. Weapons systems whose principles she'd studied in training but never expected to see. Power conduits running at loads that should have required a dedicated orbital platform. Soldiers from, she counted flags on shoulders, Brazil, India, Nigeria, Norway, South Korea, Egypt, 14 countries in the first corridor alone, moving with the particular efficiency of people who had been training together for a long time, in a place they were not supposed to talk about, for a day they were not supposed to name. She found her bunk. She put her bag on it. Eze was 4 bunks down, doing card tricks again, already. The Vorthon hit the outer defense layer on a Thursday. It gave exactly as designed. Vex Karath watched his fleet punch through it in 6 hours, and called it confirmation. The schematics were accurate, he told his council, which means we know what's coming, which means we are prepared. His fleet advanced into the dark between the outer and inner layers. The dark was not dark. The dark was 31 years of things that looked like cargo platforms and ice mining rigs and atmospheric research buoys, all of them exactly where they were supposed to be, all of them broadcasting the ordinary patient signals of equipment that was doing its job and had nothing to hide. All of them waiting for a frequency that would arrive in 17 minutes from Voss's command station and change what they were. Vex Karath pushed his fleet into the gap. He expected the second layer to appear ahead of him. It appeared around him. Not in front. Not behind. Around. Above and below and from the sides. Coming online in a sequence that felt, to his tactical AI, less like a defense network activating and more like an eye-opening. A single eye. Patient. Enormous, and already looking directly at him. He stood at his display and watched his fleet's formation, perfect, centuries refined, mathematically beautiful, begin to come apart at its edges as firing solutions came from vectors his tactical doctrine categorized as impossible, because they were above and below the engagement plane, which was where you didn't put weapons because nobody put weapons there, because there was no reason to put weapons there, unless you had spent 30 years installing them in things that looked like ice mining rigs. His tactical AI spent 11 seconds searching its database for a matching engagement pattern. It found nothing. Vex Karath looked at the display and felt, for the first time since he was a junior officer 4 centuries ago, the floor tilt under him. Not literally. The floor was fine. The floor. It was the map. The map had tilted. The territory had turned out to be a different shape than the map said it was, and the gap between the map and the territory was currently firing on his fleet from 17 degrees above the ecliptic plane. He thought about the beacon. He thought about the schematics. He thought about the words that had come back with Earth's response, which his translators had rendered accurately but which he had not. He understood now. Understood. The words were, "We told you." 3 words, clean and flat and carrying nothing that sounded like anger or fear or triumph, just the particular tone of a species that has warned something twice and is now watching it encounter the 3rd time. His first capital ship, the Unbroken Reach. 4 centuries of campaigns, never scratched, came apart in the upper engagement zone, 12 minutes into the 2nd layer engagement. He watched it on his display. He watched the icon disappear. Around him, his officers were silent. He thought, I read the schematics. He thought, I saw the teeth. He had not seen the mouth. Mars died on a Wednesday. Not all of it. Not the buried colonies. Not the deep rock garrisons. Not the 12,000 people in the mountain settlements whose tunnels went down far enough that even the Vorthon's orbital strikes arrived as something felt in the chest, rather than seen with the eyes. But Meridian City, surface-built, dome-covered, 200,000 people who had grown up watching the rust-colored sky through 4 inches of treated glass. Meridian City caught a sustained weapon strike that the dome was not built to absorb, because nothing had been built to absorb it, because nobody had imagined this specific weight arriving from this specific direction, at this specific moment. The dome cracked at 0312 station time. By 0314 it was gone. Voss received the report at her station. She read it once. She set it face down on her desk. She picked it up again and read it twice more, because the numbers needed to be real inside her before she could use them, and they could only get real by being read, and she had learned this the hard way in a career full of moments where she had tried to skip that step and paid for it later, in ways that don't show on the outside. 200,000. Face down again. She opened the fleet channel. She said what needed to be said. She closed the channel. She picked up her cold coffee, remembered it was cold, drank it anyway. The Vorthon push into the inner system had the shape of something that was winning and knew it. That was the problem. It had the shape. Vex Karath's fleet moved with the structural confidence of a doctrine that had worked 43 times, hitting hard on the forward axis, sweeping the flanks, burning anything that broadcast a military signature. They were taking losses, more than any campaign in his career, and he felt this as a friction, a constant low-level wrongness, the way a joint feels when something in it has shifted slightly and hasn't been put back. But they were advancing. The 4th planet was behind them. Earth's orbital platforms were taking damage. The math still pointed, however unevenly, in his direction. He did not know about the 2nd supply line. He did not know because it didn't exist the way supply lines exist. Ships moving in formation, broadcasting logistics traffic, lit up on his sensor net like moving fires. It existed the way water exists under rock, invisible, patient, moving through the gaps between things he was watching. Converted civilian haulers running dark, using the same Jupiter shadow trick Mata had used in Part 2, carrying munitions and personnel between the asteroid fortress and the fleet's forward positions on routes his tactical AI had not modeled because they weren't routes. Exactly. They were improvisations. New ones every 6 hours. Vorthon doctrine had a module for supply interdiction. It assumed supply lines were linear, assumed they were visible, assumed the enemy used them the same way the Dominion used them, because the Dominion had built its doctrine over 40 millennia against species who thought about logistics the same way. None of those species had grown up on a planet that had survived itself. Corporal Reyes had been inside the shelf for 9 days when they told her unit what they were actually doing there. The briefing officer was a compact woman from Oslo, who spoke with the particular economy of someone who had been giving hard information for a long time, and had learned that extra words don't soften anything, they just delay it. She said, the shelf's main weapons array was going online in 72 hours. She said, It would fire in coordination with Admiral Voss's fleet and the Luna rail launch system, a three-point crossfire that had been modeled for 6 years in simulations that nobody outside this room had been cleared to know existed. She said, the shelf would be visible to Vorthon sensors from the moment it powered up. She said, there was a window between power-up and full weapons capacity where the shelf would be targetable. She said, the window was 11 minutes. She did not say what 11 minutes meant in practical terms for the people inside the shelf. She didn't need to. Every soldier in the room was capable of subtraction. Reyes looked at the wall across from her bunk for a while after the briefing. The wall was bare metal, slightly curved, the inner surface of an asteroid that had been quietly eaten hollow over 2 decades. There were scratch marks low on the surface near the floor. Names, dates, the kind of things soldiers leave in places they've been when they want to prove, to no one in particular, that they were there, that they were real. She got up and looked at them. 14 names, some with dates, some with ranks, one that was just initials and a small drawing of a dog that had been done with real care, the kind of care that goes into the last thing you leave somewhere. Eze appeared at her shoulder. He was doing the card thing, not showing her. Just his hands, moving. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. They stood there reading names scratched into hollow asteroid. Then she borrowed his pen and added her own name and the date, and he added his below hers, and they went to eat before the mess line closed. Vex Kareth executed Commander Threll Voss at 0600. It was quick. It was formal. It was, by Dominion protocol, the correct response to a senior officer who had stood in the command council and used the word withdrawal. The word was not illegal. It had a place in Vorthon tactical language, a position to move away from, a line to pull back to, a ground to trade for time. It was a tactical instrument. It was not supposed to be an answer to the question, should we continue this campaign? That question had one answer, had always had one answer. The answer was yes, because the alternative was an admission that the Dominion had selected a wrong target, and the Dominion did not select wrong targets, and the High Warlord did not command forces that selected wrong targets. And if the losses were higher than projected, then the projection had been wrong, and not the campaign, and the solution was to correct the projection and continue. This was logic. This was 400 years of logic. This was the logic that had carried him through 43 campaigns without a loss, and it was also the logic that had looked at the precursor beacon and laughed for 4 seconds, and at the Bridger says warning, and filed it as an obstacle cleared, and at the schematics and called them a bluff. The same logic, all the way down. He watched Threll Voss's execution with his hands folded in the command rest position, and his skin cycling through gray amber, which meant calm, which meant certainty, which meant nothing was wrong with the reading of the situation. The officers around him watched him. Their skin did not cycle gray amber. Farid was eating noodles when the frequency broke. Not stopped. Broke. Like a signal hitting interference and scattering. Except it wasn't interference. It was volume. The frequency spiking across every Vorthon communication channel at once. So loud and so constant that his analysis software flagged it as equipment malfunction before he overrode the flag manually and sat up very straight in his chair. Noodles going cold. He pulled the spike's timestamp, correlated it against the fleet engagement log. The timestamp matched, to the second, the execution of Commander Threll Voss. He sat with that for a long time. The frequency, the tonal pattern he'd been cataloging, the signal Vorthon officers produced when encountering something outside their model, had been, until now, a steady background hum, present, continuous, the sound of a species in sustained cognitive disruption. The spike was different. The spike was what happened when cognitive disruption wasn't a background condition anymore. It was a foreground one. He wrote in his notes, under the word he'd translated 11 days ago. They stopped believing their own map, not because of us, because of themselves. He ate a cold noodle. He wrote one more line. This is when prey becomes dangerous, not when they're losing. When they know they're losing and can't say it out loud. He flagged the note for Voss. Then he went back to listening. The 3-point trap opened at 0900, Voss's fleet from the sunward side. The Luna rail launch system, which had been building kinetic rounds for 6 months in silence, each one the size of a small building, each one carrying no warhead, because at sufficient velocity, it didn't need one, from behind Earth's shadow, And the shelf. 11 minutes. The shelf went loud at 0847, powered up in full, announced itself to every Vorthon sensor in the system with the enthusiasm of something that had been waiting 23 years to be seen. The Vorthon targeting solutions came in at 0849. Reyes was at her station in the lower weapons bay, running feeds through her board, doing the job she'd been trained to do. Eze was 4 positions down. She could see his hands on his console. Still, for once. No cards, just his hands, doing the work. 11 minutes. The first strike hit the shelf's outer hull at 0851. The lights went red. The floor became a different thing than it had been. She held her board with both hands and kept feeding the targeting solutions through to the main array, because that was the job, and the job was the thing between now and whatever came after now, and she was not going to let the thing between now and whatever come after now fail, because her hands stopped doing it. 0852, 0853, names on a wall, a drawing of a dog. 0857, the main array went hot. 0858, it fired. The crossfire caught the Vorthon fleet's central formation, at the exact coordinates Voss's simulation had predicted, 6 years ago, in a room no one was cleared to know about. 3 firing solutions from 3 directions, none of which the Vorthon tactical AI had a module for, because the module would have required believing that your enemy had spent 3 decades building something in a hollow asteroid, and a rail system on a moon, and a fleet trap, and a 30-year program of civilian infrastructure that wasn't civilian infrastructure. Believing all of that would have required believing the schematics. Believing the schematics would have required believing the warning. The warning would have required taking the beacon seriously. The unbroken reach was already gone. 3 more capital ships died in the crossfire's first 90 seconds. The Vorthon formation, perfect, centuries refined, mathematically beautiful, did what mathematically beautiful things do when the math changes. It came apart. Vex Karath stood at his display and watched it happen. His skin had stopped cycling. Gray amber, the same tone, frozen, the color of a machine that is running a process it cannot complete. He thought about the beacon. 11,000 years old, built by something that had looked at humanity and decided a warning was the kindest thing to leave behind. Not a weapon, not a wall, a warning. He thought about the schematics. He thought about Torres, whose name he did not know, whose ship he had logged as an obstacle cleared. He thought about the 4 words that had gone out across every human frequency the moment the Bridger died, the words his translators had rendered accurately, but which he had looked at and decided he understood, and had not understood at all. They touched one of ours. He had heard a claim of ownership. He had not heard a species whose immune system runs on grief. He pulled up his communications console. He did not open a military channel. He asked his translators for a civilian frequency. A direct line, the kind of channel you use when you want to talk to someone and not at them. He sat for a moment, very still. Then he sent the request. On her station, Voss's communications officer flagged it, pulled it up, stared at it. She forwarded it to Voss without comment, because there was no comment that would help. Voss read it. She read it again. She looked at it for a long time, not the way she'd looked at the casualty report from Mars, not the same stillness, different. The stillness of someone who has been running towards something for a very long time, and has arrived, and is not sure yet what arriving feels like. She accepted. The station had no name. Humanity had built it in 60 days from asteroid salvage, and repurposed ore platform struts, and nobody had gotten around to naming it, because naming things is the kind of work you do when you believe there will be time for that later, and for 60 days, nobody had been certain there would be a later. It sat between Earth and Mars in the particular silence of something assembled by people who were very tired and very focused, and had no interest in making it look like anything other than what it was. A place to end something in. Voss arrived by shuttle. She brought 3 people. Farid, a military legal officer named Sato, and a communications specialist named Priya, who had been awake for 31 hours and was running on stimulant tabs, and the particular stubbornness of someone who refuses to miss history. Voss had a thermos of coffee. Hot this time. She had made it herself before leaving the station, and she held it the way a person holds the one warm thing in a cold room. Vex Karath arrived 20 minutes later. She had read his file. She had studied his campaigns, She had spent 6 months modeling his doctrine, and another 6 executing the plan that broke it. She thought she knew the shape of him. He was smaller than she expected. They always were, in person. His 8 limbs were folded in a configuration she had learned, from Farid's briefings, meant formal submission, a posture that translated roughly as, "I am choosing to be in this room." His skin held a single flat color, not gray amber, something darker, something that Farid had told her, on the shuttle ride over, was the Vorthon color for a concept they had no exact human word for. The closest translation was, "the state of understanding you were wrong after it is too late to be right." She looked at him across the table. He looked at her. His translator ran a half-second behind. She was used to it now. She waited. He said, "You warned us." She said, "Yes." He said, "The beacon, the patrol ship, the schematics." She said, "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. The translator had nothing to do. Then he said, "Why?" Not a question. The inflection was flat. He genuinely did not have a framework for the answer, and he knew it, and the flatness was what that looked like on his face. Voss put her thermos down. She thought about Torres, about the seawall her mother kept building, about the cold coffee she'd been drinking wrong for 6 months because hot things are for after. She said, "Because we knew what it was going to cost, ours and yours, and we gave you every chance to make it not cost that." The translator delivered it. Vex Karath's skin shifted. The dark color moved, something else underneath it, something she didn't have Farid's translation for. She watched it happen, and did not ask. He said, "Your species has a word, a concept. I studied your languages during the campaign." A pause. "The word is what?" "Mercy." "I thought I understood it. I thought it was a weakness your species performed to signal non-aggression." Voss waited. "It is not that," he said. "No," she said, "it isn't." The terms were not complicated. Withdrawal of all Vorthon forces from Sol System, and a buffer zone of 30 light-years. War reparations paid to the UEDC over 40 Dominion cycles, structured through an agreement that Sato had drafted in 4 days, and that would take 6 hours to sign. A permanent exclusion zone around Sol, not enforced by a beacon this time, not by something dead and old and easily destroyed, enforced by a treaty obligation that every Dominion vessel would carry in its standing orders. And one other thing. Voss set a data chip on the table. She said, "The recording from your command deck, the moment your council received the beacon translation." Vex Karath looked at the chip. He said, "You want to use it." She said, "I already have it. I'm telling you I'm going to use it. I'm not using it as a weapon. I'm using it as a lesson." She let him think about the difference. He said, "For your species." She said, "For anyone who finds the next beacon." She broadcast it from Voss's command station at 1400 hours. Every frequency. Maximum range. No narration, no title, no commentary before or after. Just the recording. The command deck. The translation appearing on screen. The 12 senior members of the Vorthon Dominion Strategic Council, and the High Warlord, reading the words that an 11,000-year-old device had been patient enough to keep saying. "Sol System, do not engage. You have been warned." And then the laughter, clean and long and full of 400 years of certainty. Then silence, because the recording ended. Then the casualty numbers appeared, human and Vorthon both. No labels, no flags. Just numbers, because numbers are the same in every language, and the size of a number needs no translation. The broadcast ran for 6 hours on loop. Farid was at his console on Ganymede, listening to the response signals as they came in. Not Vorthon signals. Others. Species who had been watching, from distances they considered safe, with the careful attention of neighbors who have heard something alarming next door, and are deciding whether to check on it. Signals that carried the specific quality of civilizations recalibrating, adjusting, doing what intelligent life does when it receives new information about what lives nearby. He had been getting fragments of their signals for weeks. He had been building their linguistic structures in his spare time, on the side, in the margins of his Vorthon work, because he was a man who couldn't stop listening, and the universe was always talking. He knew what some of them were saying now. Variations on the same thing. Different shapes, different signal structures, different phoneme sets, but underneath, the same. That is what was behind the beacon. That is what the warning was for. That is what has been sitting quietly in that corner of the galaxy. He wrote it in his notes. Then he wrote the report's opening line, the one they would quote later, in 17 papers and 2 histories, the one that would end up on the memorial wall at what used to be the Meridian City Dome. They had a word for us. They just didn't know it yet. He looked at it for a while. Then he closed the file and went to eat something warm. Reyes got back to Manila on a Thursday. The flight from the shelf to Earth took 9 hours on a UADC transport that smelled of recycled air and other people's exhaustion, which was the smell of every military transport she'd ever been on, and which she had decided was the actual smell of the end of things. Not victory, not relief, just the particular staleness of enclosed space that has been shared for too long by people who were very scared and didn't say so. Eze slept the whole flight, sitting up, cards in his hands, his fingers still moving even in sleep. She watched Earth come up in the viewport as they descended. She had seen it from orbit before. Everyone who had ever left it had. But there was something about it after Europa, after the shelf, after 11 minutes and names on a wall, something about the specific blue of it against black that made it look like it was doing something. Not just sitting there. Not just existing. Like it was holding on. Her mother was at the arrival terminal. She was not the type to make signs. She was not the type for airports or crowds, or visible emotion in public spaces. She was a small woman who had rebuilt the same seawall 3 times, and called it optimism, and who, when Reyes came through the doors, looked at her daughter for a long moment, and then said, "You look thin." Reyes said, "I'm fine." Her mother said, "I know. Come eat." They went home. The kitchen smelled the way it always smelled. The fan, the window, the thing in the pot that had been there since morning. Outside, the sky was blue and enormous, and doing nothing unusual, which was the most extraordinary thing about it. She sat at the table. She ate. She looked out the window at the sky that had almost been a different thing a month ago, a sky with something in it that meant to stay, and now was just a sky again. She thought about Torres, about Mata eating his bean paste, about Eze's hands on the console, still for once. She thought about the scratch marks, the 14 names, the drawing of the dog. She didn't say any of this. Her mother put more food on her plate without asking. She ate that too. Vex Kareth was returned to Dominion custody 3 days after the signing. What waited for him there was a Dominion legal process that had no module for losing, a trial structure designed around the assumption that a high warlord who returns without victory has committed a crime against the natural order of things. He knew this. He had enforced this assumption himself, once, 40 years ago, in a campaign that nobody remembered now except him. He was given one communication before the trial. He used it to request access to Earth's historical archive, not the military record. The full archive, every war, every plague, every collapse, every famine, every time the species had broken at the continental or civilizational level, and then, without asking permission from the logic of the situation, continued anyway. He read for a long time. The guard who brought his meals found him at it every shift. Same posture, screen going, skin cycling through colors she didn't have translations for. On the 4th day she asked him, because she was young and had not yet learned not to ask, "What are you looking for?" He didn't look up. "The part where they gave up," he said. "I keep waiting for it." She looked at the screen. Dates going back centuries, longer, events that should have been extinction level, wars that should have ended things, plagues, collapses, each one followed by the same thing, more history. She left him to it. The precursor beacon was never rebuilt. Earth left its remains where they were, a smear of ancient metal in the space it had occupied for 11,000 years, dark now, finished with its job. The UEDC had a brief internal debate about replacing it, about putting up something new, something with a longer range and a cleaner signal, and perhaps a little more explanation of what exactly was being warned against. The debate lasted 2 days. Voss killed it in one sentence at the end of the 2nd day. She said, "They don't need to be warned about us anymore." She stood up, picked up her coffee. Hot, this time, always hot now, and walked out. The meeting ended. The beacon stayed dark. And in the small, unremarkable corner of the galaxy, where a pale blue world sat wrapped in nitrogen and oxygen and 3 decades of very quiet preparation, the stars looked the same as they always had: patient, old, entirely unaware that the thing they were shining on had, once again, decided not to stop.